Good evening. I'm Lady Nopeingham. Tonight's stories come with a very strong trigger warning. Honestly, it's a bit of a gut punch, so be prepared. All three of them deal with not only violence and gruesome imagery, but more importantly, the horrors of mental illness. An issue that, seemingly no matter where you live, desperately needs to be recognized and treated with a higher priority than it is currently. These stories are dramatized, exaggerated, and extreme, of course, but at their heart lie painful truths that we should not ignore. Listener discretion is strongly advised. If you are worried about your mental health, please reach out. There are websites and toll-free hotlines that are available 24 hours a day, and even if it doesn't seem like it sometimes, there are people out there who care and want to help. I share these stories not because I'm going for the shock and awe factor, but because my life has been deeply affected by these issues, and because I know that the more we can accept and talk openly about them, the better off we'll all be. Well, on that note, let's get into the stories. Have a great night, everyone. I drink to make the monster go away. A day, an anniversary, for which its significance I have completely let slip from my memory, stalks me every year. I can feel it creeping up my body as my fingers tremble, and a relentless itch burns behind my eyes. I request time off from work when my hands start to shake so much that I can't even sign my own name. If I can't get those days off, I quit. I need time to prepare. I need time to recover. It's a day that I can't fight. I can only run as far as I can, for as long as I can. It's a day that, well, it's the day that I get completely hammered. I have to drink. I have to run. Drinking is the only thing that slows down the figure that follows me that entire day. That entire anniversary. I can feel its eyes tugging at me as soon as the leaves begin to change color. I often catch a fraction of its face shyly peeking at me from around corners. Wide, horrified eyes pierce through me as if it's staring at me in disbelief. It becomes braver as the day approaches. Graduating from hiding behind corners, it stares at me through dark windows and eventually watches me sleep from the foot of my bed. I know it's the day when I wake up to the sound of my shower running. I get up to turn off the shower and see the distorted figure of my stalker through the opaque curtain. It's always curled up and sobbing. When I slide the curtain to the side, nothing is there but the rushing stream of ice-cold water from the shower. After I turn off the shower, I sift through my closet and grab the same suit I wear every year on this night. I keep $200 worth of 20s in my front right pocket and a large coin in my front left. I never look at the coin. Something deep inside of me prohibits it. Throughout the night, I caress one of the sides with my thumb, and I don't have to see it to know that the number 1 is embossed onto it. After I'm dressed, I fast for the remainder of the day. I need to get blasted as quickly as possible. I fill up a flask with cinnamon-flavored bourbon just in case I get too drunk to enter any bars. It almost caught me last year, and I need to be prepared. I would just drink at home. It definitely would be a lot cheaper. But I need to keep moving so it doesn't catch me. I start the night off at a country bar called the Moon Saloon, because they serve dollar beers from 4 to 5 p.m. I know the old rhyme, beer before liquor, never been sicker, but I found that when I've been fasting, I need to work my way up to liquor. I can drink about 10 beers before my lanky pursuer shambles into the saloon. It dresses in a suit similar to mine, except I'm a bit embarrassed to say that the quality is much nicer. Throughout the night, its face gradually deforms and distorts. At this point, it usually has eyes that are swimming through its own flesh, circling around its head as if they were caught in orbit. The mouth is a gaping black hole and pulsing in size. That's my cue to move on to the next bar. I head to a pub called the Corner Tap, where I upgrade to mixed drinks. Tequila sunrises are my go-to, but I may throw a Long Island iced tea in there if I feel like I'm falling behind. I make sure I don't get distracted in conversation or by what's on TV. Instead, my eyes bounce between the entrance and the large window looking out to the patio. I can drink about 5 mixed drinks before I see it outside, skulking towards the front doors. This night in particular, however, I only made it to 2. I was shocked to see it trudging through the entrance, like it was fighting for each step. While it was much slower than when I saw it at the saloon, it was much faster than it should be right now. Its body was gangly and had disproportionate limbs extending a foot out from the cuffs of its sleeves. The flesh of its face now swirled around its skull. The ears, eyes, nose, and mouth swirled with it as if they were caught in the current of a whirlpool. I dug into my pocket for cash and slapped down $40. I squeezed the coin resting in my other pocket as the creature's long, spindly arms desperately reached out for me. I kept my eyes glued to the monster, backed away, and slowly circled around the pool table. It towered over everyone as it followed me. While my eyes were fixed on the stalker's swirling head and bony frame supporting it, I felt the collective stare of the entire pub as I walked backwards through the exit. Once outside, I jogged to the next bar on my list, the Admiral's Choice. I wear running shoes with my suit now. I learned last year that dress shoes are a liability if I need to run from that thing. Once I stopped jogging and got into line for the bar, my head began to spin. The booze was beginning to take hold of me. I felt like I needed to throw up, but I wouldn't let my body reject the alcohol. As soon as I felt the burn of stomach acid in my throat, I forced myself to swallow it back down. Once I approached the bouncer, I tried to act as sober as possible. He almost let me in, but my body retaliated, and I threw up at his feet. Out of sheer embarrassment, I covered my mouth and ran away from the now furious bouncer. I had to change my plans. I didn't feel like I was too drunk, but the jogging definitely upset my stomach. The next bar on my list was a dive simply named Good Times. I usually save this bar for last, since they don't have a bouncer, and never give me a hard time for being nearly blackout when I come in. The bartender knows me, and when I ask for a whiskey double, she usually pours me 4 fingers. By the time I was on my 5th whiskey double, all of my attention was directed at the bar's front entrance. I tightly held the coin in my pocket, anxious for when the creature strolls in. As time passed, and as my paranoia ballooned, I decided it was time to get back on the move. I pulled $80 out of my pocket and left it on the bar. However, once I stood up, I could feel the floor shift beneath my feet, as if I was walking on a waterbed. Fuck. I fell. The world was swirling around me. I was fighting against gravity itself when I felt a hand clutch my arm. A hot flash of terror shot through me. I threw a balled fist at the face of whatever was grabbing me. Fuck. The bartender was in the arms of the other patrons. Her nose was bleeding. Fuck. I took off running before I was fully standing up, but somehow I managed to reclaim my balance and dash out of the bar. I could hear angry cries of "fuck you" and "you're fucking dead" echo behind me as I sprinted down the street. I ran about 5 blocks before I had the courage to check if anyone was chasing after me. I was in the clear. My chest cavity felt like a liquor-soaked bar mat was stuffed inside of it. I could feel myself wanting to vomit again, but I closed my eyes, leaned against a brick building, and fought the urge. Cold, needle-like rain began to lightly shower over me. I launched myself from the brick building with my forearms and stumbled backwards. A parked car caught me before I landed in the street, and immediately erupted in an explosion of flashing lights and a steady honking alarm. Vomit spewed from my mouth and nose, washing over the entire passenger side of the car. My hand slid through the throw-up on the window as I stabilized myself long enough to stand. The flashing headlights intermittently washed over a tall, wiry figure slowly walking towards me, as if it were underwater. I backed away from the creature. Its head was now vibrating, like it was a bowl of fleshy water sitting on top of a loudspeaker at a concert. Its limbs appeared to be boneless and curvy like a pool noodle. I reached back into my pocket and held my coin as tightly as I could. "Hey, asshole, the fuck are you doing in my car?" Fuck. You've got to be kidding me. Behind me was a large man fast walking to give me a first-rate ass-kicking. In front of me is the nightmare I've been running from for years. My feet moved before my brain had time to think. I tried dashing across the street, but a car intercepted my attempted escape. I rolled over the hood and felt the glass of the windshield crack beneath my back. The driver got out and asked, "Oh my God, are you okay?" as I rolled off of the car to continue my sprint. I cut across the street and ran as fast as I could to the park. In mid-stride, I glanced over my shoulder at the scene I left behind me. The person who hit me was on the phone, the large man silenced his car alarm, and the creature was bending down in the middle of the street, picking something up. My veins burned with each heartbeat. My lungs felt like they were completely absent of air. I kept running. I kept running until the roar of the city faded, and the still silence of the park embraced me. I poured myself into a park bench and focused on breathing. Minutes passed before the acidic burn in my chest subsided. I reached into my suit jacket and pulled out the flask of cinnamon-flavored whiskey I had prepared. I took 3 large, burning gulps and welcomed the warm numbness that washed over me. After patting my left pocket, I realized I had lost the mysterious coin after the car hit me. As I lamented the loss of the coin, a bright light beamed directly at me. I remember thinking that I must be dying. This was death. I wasn't scared, though. I took a few more sips from my flask as the light grew brighter and brighter. "Had a few too many drinks tonight?" a voice asked. I raised a hand up to shield my eyes from the light. I saw 2 dark figures that I wasn't able to identify until I heard voices chime through the static of a radio. "No, ma'am," I lied. 30 minutes and 3 failed sobriety tests later, I was handcuffed and placed in the back of their police unit. The officers stood outside of the vehicle, inaudibly speaking into their radios. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the headrest, letting the world swirl around me. I nearly fell asleep until I heard a steady tapping at the window. When I opened my eyes to see what was tapping, I saw the creature, hunched over, peering into the back seat. I was eventually placed in the drunk tank. The smell of bleach and the bright, fluorescent light was overwhelming. It was as if the sober world was eagerly trying to seep in, but the alcohol refused. My eyes were heavy. The last thing I saw before sleep claimed me was the abstract, surreal creature slipping into my cell. I woke up hours later. The hangover was beginning its throbbing assault in my head. No one else was in the cell, aside from one man who was sitting next to me. His stare was relentless. I sat up and was beginning to scoot away when he placed a hand over my wrist, stopping me. He wore an expensive-looking watch and neatly polished shoes. It wasn't until I got a good look at his suit that I realized that this was the creature stalking me. My heart pounded. Fear burned through my veins, and my skin chilled over. "Hey," the creature gently said. "Hey," I replied. My pursuer extended his open hand out to me. Resting on top of his palm was what I could only assume was the coin that I had dropped. Reluctantly, I looked into its eyes. I was expecting its eyes to be bestial, malicious, and evil. Instead, They were disappointed, sad, and familiar. The creature was me. Not me as I am right now, but a better me. The me that I could have been. It was a full manifestation of all the promise and potential that I had wasted, that I had drowned. He, was the embodiment of every kind thought, word, and belief my friends and family had for me. He was the future that I had so fondly dreamt of, but avoided through absent neglect. He was the me that I told myself I would be if I could just go 1 year sober. He was a reminder of why I hate myself, why I drink. He was a living I told you so. My hot, watery eyes returned to his hand. I plucked the coin from his palm with trembling fingers. It read, 1 year sober, with a large embossed 1 in the center. Tears streamed down my face as the bleach-soaked jail floors and the fluorescent lights seeped into my world. I had nothing to say. But the other me repeated 1 sentence for the remainder of my time in jail. I don't forgive you. I don't forgive you. I don't forgive you. I don't forgive you. Forgive me. The cycle. What we do in life echoes in eternity. Maximus. I didn't expect that at all. The movies completely failed to even remotely depict what happens. I didn't feel at peace or like I was drifting between realms. There was definitely no bright white light or out-of-body experience. There was just the feeling of fear. Raw and intense fear. It was happening. There was no going back, and it was cold. I was alone, scared and cold. There were no angels leading the way, just darkness. Warmth finally washed over me when I lost control of my bodily functions and pissed myself, but I suppose that doesn't count. The coffee shop looked familiar, but it didn't at the same time. I felt I'd been here before, but couldn't remember coming. The old American-style booths, with the red leather seats. The black and white checkered linoleum floor shone bright with wax. There was no one else in the shop. I was alone, but it felt crowded. It was warm, but there was also a lack of heat. There was a coffee mug in front of me, black coffee, steam rising from the mug. I don't like black coffee. The bell above the door rang out. I didn't look back, but I knew who had walked in. The streets outside looked equally as familiar as the coffee shop did, but I couldn't put a name on the street we were on, or the town we were in. No wind outside. The trees lining the desolate street were still. Rusty cars lined the sidewalk, and not a soul moved. I could hear his footsteps as he walked towards me. None of the shops outside looked open, just empty. He had reached my booth. He sat opposite me. I knew who he was, but his name eluded me. Maybe I had known him as a kid growing up and never encountered him again. Whatever the case, he was a familiar face. Or maybe he just had that face that looks familiar. We sat in silence. He, too, had a coffee mug in front of him, steam rising, presumably from black coffee. I analyzed him. He seemed to be doing the same. Fairly good-looking guy, nothing special, medium-length brown hair, strong chin and jawline, almost non-existent lips. But his eyes, I couldn't read into them. They just seemed to be black pits of emptiness. I felt I was getting lost in them, an abyss. He finally broke the silence and said my name. Jake? Where do I know you from? I asked. You don't, was his reply. I don't understand what you mean. Where do you think you are? He asked. I don't really know. The realization that I had no idea where I was hit me. He smiled at my confusion. His teeth were sharp. Only when he smiled did his eyes come to life. It seemed almost like a fire was kindled deep inside of him. The fire in his eyes scared me. I felt the fear deep in my bones, down to my very soul. "Is this hell?" I asked. "No, not at all, Jake. This is a fate much worse than hell. Let's go take a look." I was looking at me now. We weren't in the coffee shop. I wasn't okay. By me, I mean the me I was looking at. I could hear crying in the distance. It was a woman's sobs. It pained me to hear them. She seemed beyond console. "Who is that?" "You'll see," was the reply. A familiar voice rang out. I could finally place the voice. It was my stepdad. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying. I could still only see the not okay me. I looked more closely. I was lying in a pool of my own sick, and there was a seemingly large wet spot by my crotch. I asked the familiar stranger what was going on. "The fate worse than hell," he said, "is that you're fated to watch the devastation you've caused by your actions for eternity." The environment grew brighter, and I could make out that we were in my bedroom. I still lay in a puddle of vomit. My stepdad rushed to the vomit-soaked me and shook me desperately. My bed was unmade and the covers had piled up on the floor. My basketball medals and trophies glistened in the beautiful morning sun. The dead me was still being shaken by my stepdad. Finally, I came to see whose pained cries I heard earlier. My sickly old mother collapsed next to her husband and desperately tried to wake me. She has been sick, but now she looked as if she'd given up all hope. The few strands of hair she had were plastered to her tear-soaked face. The big, burly man she had left my real dad for was still shaking me. He had thrown the pill dispenser I had made use of to the other side of the room. The bottle seemed to gleam smugly at its victory over human life. Chunks of sick stuck to his shirt. Looking at myself, I knew they were clearly too late. "I hope you enjoyed the show. The encore is forever," the strange man said. I looked back at myself, dead and soiled. Suddenly it all went blank. Light slowly drifted back and I saw, again, myself lying on the floor. I could hear the sobs and the familiar voice. It was happening all over again. Safety. I'm safe here. They definitely wouldn't think to look for me here. I can't tell you where here is because they might get to you, and thereby get to me. But you're a part of me, so you basically know where here is. You're in my head, so if you delve deep enough and focus intently, you can see where I am. But there's no need for such. I'm safe, and so you are too. They're dangerous, and our safety is my top concern. I can't let them get us. I've seen what they're capable of, and it's not fun-looking. The blood streamed down the sidewalk. The exit site of the bullet looked like a small creature had crawled out of his head. It was a gaping hole with bits of brain and hair hanging by threads. Instant lights out. His brown hair matted to what was left of his skull by the scarlet mess. His scrawny arms lay motionless at his side, covered in dirt accumulated on the walkway. Blood seeping into his t-shirt. A stain like that definitely won't come out. A small crowd had gathered and looked on, in a mixture of awe and disgust. It was such a grotesque horror, committed on such a beautiful day. Rather warm for autumn, but nonetheless still an overall great day. Besides for the man with his brain painting the sidewalk, it definitely wasn't a great day for him. The crowd spoke in low murmurs. No one was able to make sense of the atrocious act committed in the city center in broad daylight. Cars continued to drive by, each stopping briefly to try and catch a glimpse of the drama evidently unfolding on the sidewalk. The buildings enclosing the street on both sides seemed to blend into the background. There was no one to focus on but him. He must have known too much about them. This is what happens when you know too much. This is why I need to protect us. He was probably a father, computer technician, or something equally boring, and now look at him. The ambulance sirens caused everyone to divert their attention. Strange no police had shown up. I'm sure many a concerned civilian had called it in. Now only an ambulance. Curiosity killed the cat. This was my first encounter with their stronghold on the public. Crazy, hey? A fire in the building I lived in was another danger alert. The fire killed one of the guys I knew who stayed on the 3rd floor. He was a pretty cool guy. We'd played a few pickup games of basketball together at the community center courts a few times. He, too, must have known too much about them. Incredible the lengths they'd go to get rid of him, starting a fire in an apartment building where hundreds of people live. Strangely enough, he was the only death in the fire. The fire department issued a statement that a lit cigarette he fell asleep with was the cause of the fire. I was among the crowd outside the building being tended to by paramedics when they wheeled his charred corpse out the smoking remnants of our communal home. His once white skin was now a very reddish pink in most parts. The rest of him was crispy black. Blood seeped out through the cracks in the now hardened skin and gave color to the white sheet that did a poor job of concealing the abomination he had become. I may not be a smart man, but I know better to believe the nonsense story that the fire department gave about the cause of the fire. It wasn't a cigarette. It was them. The crispy man had known too much, and they dealt with him. The embers of the fire glowed dimly in the flashing lights of the fire truck, and shouts and cries of the now homeless people faded into the background. They had struck again. My third and final encounter with their destructive power was by far the worst. It was the boot up my ass I needed to get us to safety. It was all the confirmation I needed to know they posed a real threat to us. I didn't know the guy, but whoever he was, he didn't deserve to die the way he did. I was taking a walk through the park to clear my mind of all the negativity and stress I'd been inflicted with, when my thoughts were dragged instantly back to the park. I had stumbled and nearly tripped in the almost dark park. I looked down, annoyed, to see what had caused my stumble. There, in my path, was the abdomen of a man. His abdomen was dressed impeccably well, so it was fair to assume his grand night had come to an abrupt end. I was at a loss for words and didn't know what to do. My first thought was to locate the rest of his body. Leaving the abdomen donned in a tuxedo jacket, I walked slowly down the path, scanning left and right for parts of the man. Boy, did I find them. He had been completely ripped apart. Strewn on both sides of the path were his hands, the rest of his arms, his feet in what looked like expensive dress shoes, and the legs. The head, however, was nowhere to be found. Unperturbed, I continued my search. The path led me to the gate of the park where my search proved fruitful. Mounted on the spikes above the gate was the stranger's head. They had no respect for the dead. How could they violate the man like this? All because he knew too much. Leaving the head on the gate, I left in a hurry. No point summoning the police. They would not get involved with these people. Now do you see why I must do all I can to ensure our safety? These people know no bounds. They have no regard for the law or human life. All this death because of the knowledge people had acquired. Knowledge is power, but in this case, it is also grounds for death. Unfortunately for us, I am knowledgeable. As I'm sure you can guess, we are next on the hit list. I won't tell you exactly what it is I know, so if they get to me first, they might spare you for your ignorance. You must be wondering why I fear for you. Because as I said, you're a part of me. You know what I know. But upon my death, the bond might break. Therefore, you won't know it anymore, thus being spared. That, however, is worst-case scenario. I would rather just keep us both alive. Do you hear that? The buzzing? I think they've found me. We've been compromised. Sorry, old pal, but this is the end of the road. The door is opening now. Oh, God, how are they getting in? The door has no handles, so how? Oh, God. The door opened, and the nurses walked into the padded room. He sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, shouting, straitjacket sitting tightly around him. Every time he was scheduled to get his medicine, he did this. screaming and shouting about them and knowledge. Once sedated, the nurse put the clozapine in his mouth and gave him enough water to wash them down. Then they checked to make sure he swallowed the medication. Anthony had been admitted into the psychiatric ward of St. Bernard's Hospital over 3 years ago. He was found wandering the streets, covered in blood, by police after an extensive manhunt was launched following the death of 3 unrelated individuals. Brutal deaths, all found to be carried out by Anthony. He was sent to trial and proven extremely mentally unstable, earning him a lifetime stay in the padded room. The mind is a terrible thing to waste.